How's it going? I thought this was, I woke up this morning thinking it was going to be a lot easier, and I think when I came in that door, it kind of pushed the reset button on all that, everything that was going in my head. It's amazing to see you all. I know there's a lot of people that wish that they could be here, and you know, the time that we're in right now, it's hard for everybody. So I know there's a lot of people here in spirit, and I know there's some very close people that are watching this on the streaming channel too. So thank you all. Thank you all for being a part of my dad's life. Yeah, he loved you all. So I'm really here to talk on behalf of our family, especially the immediate family. My mom, I want to speak on behalf of you. Randy, who lives in Albuquerque, speaking on behalf of you. Liz, who lives in Denver, speaking on behalf of her. It's my sister. Jamie, as many of you know, speaking on behalf of him too. So first, Randy being the oldest son, he's 19 years older than me. He's got a unique perspective of my dad that I wouldn't be able to speak to. So we asked Randy to say something, so I'm going to read a letter that Randy wrote first. So a lot of you here know my dad as you have seen him, a warm, friendly guy who has lived in Texas for many years. That's why I thought you might enjoy the opportunity to hear about my dad's life from many years ago before he moved to Texas. After all, I have known him since I was a boy, and that was quite a while ago. As you may know, my dad was a pilot in the Air Force. When I was young, my dad went flying at the time, all the time. I thought it was the coolest thing. When they had open houses on the base, he would take me and go look at airplanes, and I thought that was awesome. When I was little, we used to make model airplanes together. That was something fun that I really looked forward to. This reached an apex when I was in 4th grade, and we made a model of the Saturn V rocket and the lunar landing module. It took us a long time to build it, and we painted all the parts to make it nice. It was huge. I remember it being as tall as me, and Randy is really tall. I enjoyed it for a long time. I continued to make model airplanes for years afterwards and thought of him all the time while doing that. When I was about 12, Dad was stationed at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. During that time, he bought a small cottage in Shadyside, Maryland, so he could spend the weekends at Chesapeake Bay. He found a 20-foot sailboat for sale that had been lying on the beach covered in barnacles. After many hours, he had scraped the barnacles off, refinished the bottom, and had a fine sailing craft. I visited him that summer, and he taught me to sail, which is something I still enjoy to this day. My dad often had a clear vision of what to do in a time of crisis. For example, when I was 5 years old, we lived in Alaska. I remember one night he didn't come home because he ejected from his T-33 jet and spent the night alone in the Alaskan wilderness in the middle of the winter. Alone in the Alaskan wilderness in the winter. I was so happy when he returned home. That made a big impression on me. So those are a few stories about my dad, and some I suspect you didn't know. He had a rich and full life and touched many people. He will be missed. Thank you, Randy. So Randy, thank you for that letter. I think the things that you pointed out about Dad, he was very intentional. He was intentional with all of us. And something you pointed out that I wouldn't necessarily say about my dad from my memories of him, but he seemed like a really adventurous guy. And, I would never go buy a sailboat, that's for sure, and clean it up. But I think for both James and Randy, they have an image of my dad that they remember that he was larger than life. And those that remembered him in those years when he was associated with the Air Force, he really was. And we got to taste that when we would go to the bases even here locally and go to the BX, and he would get a salute that you just realized that my dad was a big deal. And so what I want to do is just kind of briefly just share some of the characteristics that I loved about my dad and that I learned a lot from. So the first thing, I'm going to kind of pair up kind of three characteristics all into one, but he was very content, he was very selfless, and he was very patient. And I think those wrap up into a man who has just had that meekness that we're all called to. He didn't need much. I mean, didn't just need much. He really didn't want anything. And I think that really had to do with his selflessness. Like, he would never buy anything for himself. He never really wanted anything. He just wanted everybody else to be happy, and he was willing to sacrifice anything he wanted for what other people wanted. He was the king of duct tape. So you combine this person who was content, selfless, and loved duct tape, and you just find a lot of duct tape around the house. And so he was willing to do anything he could to make something last as long as possible. And that was just a quality in him that I loved. And so throughout just the rest of me talking, I'm going to share some classic Hal Brost quotes, because he was kind of the king of quotes. When we had certain things, he would just throw out some quotes, and it's like, man, I've heard that a million times. So one of these related to his just being content was, leave well enough alone. He would say that all the time when we were moving furniture around the house or any kind of project we wanted to do. He's just like, leave well enough alone. He knew it wasn't going to really improve our life or increase our joy. And so I love that quote from him. And then whenever we would flippantly spend some money or something, he'd throw out the quote, I see, I want, I buy. That's all y'all do is I see, I want, I buy. So, just a great quotes that remind me of him. Related to him being patient, nobody's ever perfectly patient, right? But overall, I would say he was a very patient guy. But there was a quote that Jamie told me this morning about him, just a quote that he remembered of him. And we used to go on these family trips when we lived in Ohio. We'd go on a family trip all the way down to Florida. And we had this conversion van. So we had like a king-size bed in the back. And this is before kids had to put on seatbelts. And so Jamie and I would be back there just doing WrestleMania 1985, like throughout the whole trip. And I could only imagine, because like my kids talk and I get frustrated in the car, but we're back there wrestling. And a classic quote my dad would say always is, separate and don't breathe each other's air for a little bit. And we heard that a lot. My dad was a very steady man, and that's a quality I love so much about him. He was just even keel. He didn't have a whole lot of highs. He didn't have a whole lot of lows. One story that just kind of goes with this is I was in a golf tournament in Austin when I was in college, and I had this shot, and it seemed to be kind of an impossible shot, and I hit the shot really good, and I remember hearing some clapping from some of the people that were watching, but I just hear my dad say, decent. I'm like, who says decent, as a compliment in the middle of a golf tournament? But Dad did, just because he wasn't very easily impressed, he was just pretty even keel. And then, one thing about his steadiness is that when he said yes, he really meant it. When you need a favor from him, or you need him to do something, or you need him to agree with something, he would not only just say yes, but he would follow up that yes so much faster than anybody you can imagine. I think that's such a neat characteristic. Whether that was, hey, I need you to help me with something, Dad, at my house. He would not only say yes, but he's calling me the next morning saying, when can I do this? And he took that yes really heavy too. He wouldn't just say yes to everything, but when he did say yes, he really meant it, and he followed through with it. And just kind of the last thing about his steadiness is the quote that he had for me every time I would go play golf in a golf tournament. And he would just say, hit the fairway, hit the green, lag the putt, make the putt. Hit the fairway, hit the green, lag the putt, make the putt. Every single time. That's a pretty simple guy. probably the thing that I think everybody has spoken to tonight is that he was a very humble man. You know, it's in these times where you start to reflect how amazing he was, and you start to realize all the accomplishments he had from high school through the academy, Air Force, in business. He was a very, very accomplished man, but he never wanted to talk about himself. Like, you would have to dig it out, and that's why I did in that interview. Like, that was, Dad, you never talk about yourself, so we have to, like, sit down, and I want to hear about you. And that humility was just awesome. And I wish he shared more stories about himself, though, because I think there's so many more stories that we don't even know. One thing that kind of wraps the humility piece up is one of my best friends growing up, a guy named Matt Bevere. He was one of the first people to call me after my dad passed. And he just said it really, really good. He just said, this is what I remember of your dad, is that I knew he was always the smartest person in the room, and he was a warrior, but he was just the silliest guy. And I just thought that was so who my dad was. He was a tremendously smart person, and but he was just silly, and you just wanted to be around him. That smile that you guys saw in that video, that just kind of showed it. And so just to wrap up the whole thing, sorry I may have spoken longer than I should have, but to speak on him and my mom's love story, it's a very, very special love story. And one of the last weekends that I had with my dad, he actually touched on it, where he had said the first time he saw her, he knew he was going to marry her. And you saw the timeline was really quick. I think they were engaged the first couple days. And they had an amazing love story. And I would say my mom, their entire 42 years of marriage, never doubted my dad's love for her. His love language was acts of service. And there was a time when he lost the ability to do that acts of service. And it was a really hard thing for him. And that's where he started saying, I love you a lot. And he said that to Mom a lot. She just recently told me that he was starting to say it like 15 times a day because he couldn't do anything anymore. And that was his love language. And so, and Mom, likewise, you loved him so well. The last 6 years, it's been tough. I know, but you were just constant, you're faithful, you cared for him really well, so thank you. So all that to say, Dad's home. He is home. The last words he told me were Jess and I were trying to kind of shower him with truth. Didn't really want to ask him questions or anything and put that on him, but we're just kind of reading scripture over him and stuff, and Dad just said, I love him. And I know he's real. And so he's with Jesus and he's home. So thank y'all.